So today we are going to work on block 5 and 6 of our vintage ornament quilt. One is a star and the other one is just a simple patchwork. So hello and welcome. I'm Jackie with Jackie Russell Creates, where we talk about everything quilting. I give tips, tricks, and techniques for your next quilting project. So if you've been following along, we're making a vintage ornament quilt that I'm going to be throwing over the back of my couch for the holiday season. Mine is going to be square, and I think it's like 58 by 58. You can definitely make it bigger. I will be giving you some bonus blocks to be able to make it bigger and longer. Each block we're making 2 of. So in the meantime, why don't you hit the subscribe button if you want to learn more about quilting and sewing. And let's get started making these cute little blocks. So we're going to work on the star block today, or first, and you're going to need a pattern block, and I cut it at 4.5 by 4.5. You're going to need 3-inch squares of a pattern, and of your star color, I chose white. You're also going to need 4 2.5-inch of your color fabric. That's going to be in the corners. You're also going to need 4 white or your background fabric at 2.5. You're going to need a gray that is 1.5 by 2.5, and then some white that is 1.5 by 3.5. Another white that's 1.5 by 8.5. A 2.5 by 8.5, and then you're going to need 2 12.5 by 8.5. So to get started, we're just going to put the whites mainly off to the side. We're going to start with our 3-inch blocks, and we're going to make them as half square triangles. You can take your ruler, and we're going to draw a line from corner to corner. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew 1/4 inch on each side of that line. And because I like to work in stages, I guess, as much as I can, so when I'm at the sewing machine, I'm also going to sew the 1.5-inch white to the gray on both sides. And because I have the 1/4 foot on, I can just line up my line that I drew along the edge of my presser foot, and it will give me that 1/4 inch. And this is how it comes off the sewing machine, because I did the chain stitch. So I'm just going to snip those threads in between, and then we're just going to take our ruler and we're going to cut on those lines that we drew. And now there's our half square triangles. We're going to take it to the ironing board, and we're going to press this one toward the gray. Now that we have them all pressed, we need to square them up, and they need to be squared at the 2.5 inch. So I like to use my June Taylor ruler, and it's so simple to use. You just mark up your 45, and you line up your 2.5, and then cut down the 2.5 inch marks. Then all you do is flip it around and do the other sides, and it gives you a perfect 2.5 inch square, half square triangle. So I'm going to cut the rest of these up, and then we'll be back to assemble the block. Now what I like to do is lay out my block so I know what I need to sew as my strips. So we're going to take our 2.5 of the green, we're going to put 1 in each corner, and then we're going to lay out our star pieces so we know which way to sew the green fabric. So you pretty much want your stars or your white pieces to come into the corners to give you that star. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the 2 center ones together, and then sew these, the top and the bottom rows together, and then we're going to sew the 2 side pieces onto our 4.5 square, and then we'll sew each row together. And then I'm going to also take the 1.5 by 8.5 white and sew it together using the chain stitch. So there's the first two of the top row here, and so I'm just going to flip this one over and sew onto there. So there is the first side of the middle row, so I'm going to sew that to my design and then sew that piece over to that. So here is our rows sewn together. We're going to go to the ironing board and we're going to press rows 1 and 3 to the left and the center one to the right, and then you're going to sew the strips together. So because we press these the opposite direction, they should nestle up to give you that clean corner. And I'm going to pin to make sure they stay in place. And I'm going to go ahead and pin both sections together, or all 3 rows, so then I can just flip it over to just stitch the whole thing together, and then you'll just take it to the ironing board and press it. And when you're done pressing, this square should be an 8.5, and there is the center of our block. Now we're going to do the snowball effect to give our corners. So we're going to take our 2.5-inch squares of our white, and we're going to draw a line down the middle of it, corner to corner. But this time, instead of stitching on both sides of the line, we're going to actually stitch right down that line. All I'm doing is using a friction pin. They are my favorite tool to use. You can use whatever works for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay them, we're going to line up the corner, making sure our stitch line is going diagonal, and we're going to stitch all 4 of these on, one on each corner, going diagonal, right on that line. So here we have them all stitched on, and I like to make sure that I have them stitched the right direction. Yes, I have stitched them on backwards before. So if they're going the right directions as you open up, we're going to now cut those off. I line up my 1/4 inch on my ruler onto that stitch line and trim it off. I don't throw away these triangles. They make good half square triangles for future projects or for some sashing or even corner pieces if you want to do a border. And now we're just going to go press them toward the white section. This should measure 8.5 by 8.5. You can trim it up if you need to. Now we're going to finish the block. What I like to do is take the piece that has the gray, and I like to fold it in half and just kind of finger press that down. Just give a little crease. Because we have this seam here in the middle, we know that that's going to be the center, and so I'm going to line that crease that I made on the green up with that seam. That way I know my ornament top is center. It should be center when you stitch this on, but I like to have that extra security. So we're going to just stitch this on, and then we're going to take the 2.5 by 8.5 white fabric, and we're going to sew that, not glue it, we're going to sew that onto the bottom. We're going to press this open, and then we're going to come back and stitch on our 12.5 strips. Now to finish up the block, we're just going to add our 12.5-inch strips to each side. And there is our 5th ornament block. And so now let's start with this is a checkered block. You're going to need the same measurements for all our white pieces. I will link them all down in the description below. You're going to need the 1.5 by 2.5 gray. Then you're going to need 4 pieces from 2 different types of fabric that are 2.5-inch squares. Then you're going to need 2 that are 2.5 by 8.5-inch squares. So what I did is I had a jelly roll, and I fussy cut to make sure I had the bird and the gnome that says gnome for the holidays. And that's what I'm using for my checkered. This one's pretty simple. You just sew every other fabric together. So you have 4 pieces of 2, and then you'll sew them together so you have 4 and 4. And then you're going to press one to the right and one to the left. So I also sewed the 1.5 by 3.5 to the gray, and I pressed toward the gray. Now we're going to take our 2 strips, and because we press them in opposite directions, they're actually going to nestle up against each other, making a nice corner there. So we're going to sew those together. I am pinning. I like to pin at each seam. That just helps keep it together as I'm stitching. Then I'm going to take the 1.5 by 8.5, and I'm going to stitch that to the gray. We're going to press to the white, and then on the checkered you can press open, or you can press whichever way is less bulk, which way the fabric wants to go. Now we're going to add our 2.5 by 8.5 onto the top and the bottom of our checkered. We're going to sew it at 1/4 inch, and we're going to press it toward the solid strip. And when we come back, we are going to do the snowball effect. Now we're going to do the snowball effect. We're going to take our 2.5 squares of our white, and we're going to draw a line. I'm just using a friction pen from corner to corner. Then we're going to sew right on that line. What we're going to do is we're going to line up the corners, making sure our line is going diagonal, and you're going to stitch along that line on all 4 corners. Okay, so we have them all sewn on. I like to double check, make sure that they are, when they open up, they go the right direction. Now we're going to take, and I just line up my 1/4 inch line on my ruler with the stitch line and cut off the extra. I save these triangles to make half square triangles with, or to use in my applique. Now we're going to go press these toward the white. There's the center of our block. Now all we need to do is finish it. So what I like to do is fold this in half at the top and give me a little finger press so I have a crease there. And I'm going to do the same thing with the gray. And this just helps to ensure that your top is center with your ornament. So now I'm going to take that crease and line it up with that crease, and we're going to pin it. Then we're going to take the 2.5 by 8.5, and we're going to stitch it to the bottom. Then we're going to press toward the white and then toward the striped fabric, or however your fabric wants to go at the top, whichever way gives you less bulk. Then we'll come back and finish up our block. Now to finish up the block, all we're going to do is sew on our 12.5 inch strips to each side. So here is block 5 and 6 of our vintage ornament quilt. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and maybe share it with some of your friends. That's what helps my channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. Until then, happy quilting, my friends.